May 22, 2004. The sun begins to set over the tiny farming community of Hallam, Nebraska, population 276, as residents go about their Saturday evening routines, completely unaware that in less than 2 hours, a tornado wider than their entire town will erase it from the map. 2.5 miles across, this would become the widest tornado ever recorded on Earth at that time. A spinning wall of destruction so massive that from one side of the vortex, you could not see the other edge. A monster that would hold the world record for 7 years, and that still stands as Nebraska's widest tornado in history. Yet today, outside of meteorological circles and Nebraska itself, almost nobody remembers it happened. It is May 22, 2004, and meteorologists at the Storm Prediction Center are watching atmospheric conditions fall into place across the Central Plains that would make any severe weather forecaster nervous. The ingredients for an extreme tornado outbreak are converging over south-central Nebraska with frightening precision. A powerful upper-level low-pressure system is diving southeast out of the Rockies, bringing with it a strong jet stream and creating a broad area of rising air across the region. Meanwhile, rich Gulf moisture is streaming northward into Nebraska, pushing dew points into the upper 60s and low 70s, extremely high moisture content for the Central Plains. Surface temperatures are climbing into the mid-80s under partly cloudy skies, creating an incredibly unstable atmosphere with convective available potential energy values exceeding 4,000 joules per kilogram, more than enough fuel to sustain violent supercell thunderstorms. But moisture and instability alone do not create the rotating supercells capable of producing long-track violent tornadoes. For that, you need wind shear, the change in wind speed and direction with height. And on May 22, 2004, the wind shear was exceptional. At the surface, winds were blowing from the southeast at 15 to 25 miles per hour. Just a few thousand feet up, they were howling from the south-southwest at 40 to 50 miles per hour. And at jet stream level, winds were screaming from the west-southwest at over 100 miles per hour. This created both strong speed shear and significant directional shear, the perfect combination to cause thunderstorm updrafts to begin rotating. Recognizing the extreme nature of these conditions, the Storm Prediction Center issued a moderate risk for severe weather across Nebraska and Kansas, with a 10% probability of tornadoes within 25 miles of any point, a significant tornado threat. But even the forecasters could not have predicted what was about to unfold. By early afternoon, a dry line, a boundary between dry desert air from the west and moist Gulf air from the east, had set up across south-central Nebraska. This invisible atmospheric battleground would become the birthplace of monsters. At approximately 5:30 p.m. Central Daylight Time, the first thunderstorms of the day exploded along the dry line near the Kansas and Nebraska border. Within minutes, towering cumulonimbus clouds were punching through 50,000 feet into the atmosphere, their anvil tops spreading out like massive mushroom clouds across the Nebraska sky. One storm in particular, developing just southwest of Superior, Nebraska, quickly began to dominate the atmosphere around it. Weather radar showed a classic supercell signature, a hook echo wrapping around the storm's updraft, a clear indication that the thunderstorm had developed a mesocyclone, a rotating column of air several miles wide. The Storm Prediction Center had seen enough. At 5:55 p.m., they issued a tornado watch for south-central Nebraska, valid until midnight. But this storm wasn't waiting for nightfall. By 6 p.m., the supercell was displaying all the characteristics of a violent tornado producer. The storm's base had lowered significantly, with a large rotating wall cloud clearly visible to storm chasers positioning themselves in its path. The National Weather Service office in Hastings, Nebraska, issued a tornado warning at 6:10 p.m. for the storm as it approached the tiny community of Ruskin. What happened next would be captured on video by multiple storm chasers and remain one of the most impressive displays of tornadic development ever documented. At 6:20 p.m., approximately 3 miles west of Ruskin, Nebraska, a small funnel cloud descended from the wall cloud. Within seconds, it touched the ground, weak, narrow, almost unimpressive. An F0, or weak F1 at most, kicking up dust in an open field. Storm chasers watching from a few miles away noted it in their logs, but were not particularly alarmed. Weak tornadoes like this are common with Nebraska supercells. But this tornado had other plans. As the condensation funnel made contact with the surface, the tornado began to feed on the incredible instability and wind shear in the atmosphere around it. Like opening a drain in a bathtub, the storm's powerful updraft, rising at over 150 miles per hour, began pulling more and more air into the rotation. The narrow funnel started to expand and expand and expand. Within just 3 minutes, the tornado had grown from a rope-like vortex into a large wedge tornado nearly half a mile wide. But it was not done. As the tornado crossed Highway 4 and moved into open farmland south of Ruskin, something remarkable was happening within the storm's structure. The entire mesocyclone, the parent rotation of the supercell, was tightening and lowering to the ground, and the tornado was growing to match it. Storm chaser accounts from this moment describe an almost surreal sight. The tornado was not just growing wider, it was becoming the entire base of the storm. One chaser later described it as watching the sky itself reach down and touch the earth. Another said, "I have never seen anything like it before or since." By 6:35 p.m., just 15 minutes after touchdown, the Hallam tornado had grown to over a mile wide, and it was still expanding. At 6:47 p.m., as the tornado approached the junction of Highways 4 and 74 southwest of Hallam, storm chasers positioned on high ground finally got a clear view of what they were dealing with. What they saw would be seared into their memories forever. The tornado had evolved into a massive, slowly rotating cylinder that stretched across the entire visible horizon. From north to south, the condensation funnel, now more gray than white due to the immense amount of dirt and debris it was ingesting, extended as far as the eye could see. Multiple subvortices, smaller but still powerful tornadoes orbiting within the parent circulation, danced along the outer edge of the massive wedge like satellites around a planet. Radar analysis would later confirm what witnesses were seeing. The tornado was now 2.5 miles wide. To put that in perspective, the entire town of Hallam, from its northern edge to its southern edge, was less than a mile across. This tornado was wider than Manhattan at some points. You could fit multiple neighborhood subdivisions inside its circulation simultaneously. At its core, winds were estimated to be reaching 260 miles per hour or higher, solidly in the F4 to F5 range. But unlike narrow, violent tornadoes that concentrate their destruction in a tight path, this monster spread its fury across a massive swath. Everything within that 2.5-mile wide circulation was being subjected to winds of at least 100 to 150 miles per hour, with the strongest winds concentrated in multiple subvortices, carving unpredictable paths within the larger rotation. The ground itself began to shake as the tornado moved northeast at 35 miles per hour. Not particularly fast for a tornado, but terrifying given its size. Witnesses miles away reported hearing a sound like 1,000 freight trains, a roar so deep and loud it seemed to emanate from the earth itself, and it was heading directly toward Hallam. At 7:05 p.m., tornado sirens wailed across Hallam as the National Weather Service issued an urgent tornado emergency for the town. Residents had approximately 15 minutes to take shelter before the monster would arrive. In those critical minutes, families rushed to basements. Some drove south trying to escape the path. Others, with nowhere to go, huddled in bathrooms and interior closets, praying their homes would hold. At Hallam High School, administrators were doing final preparations for the post-prom party, scheduled for later that evening. When the tornado warning came through, they made the decision to cancel and evacuate. That decision would save dozens of teenage lives. At 7:20 p.m., The southern edge of the tornado's circulation crossed Highway 33 on the south side of Hallam. Trees began to snap and bend as the outer winds reached the town's edge. Within seconds, the first homes were engulfed. What happened over the next 8 minutes can only be described as total devastation. The massive wedge did not just hit Hallam, it consumed it. Unlike a narrow tornado that might destroy homes on one street while leaving the next block relatively untouched, this 2.5-mile wide monster covered the entire town simultaneously. Every building, every home, every business fell within its destructive circulation at the same time. The high school, where dozens of students would have been celebrating prom just hours later, was completely destroyed. The gymnasium's roof was peeled away and hurled hundreds of yards to the northeast. Brick walls collapsed inward as the building's structure failed under the extreme wind pressure. Later investigations would reveal that large sections of the school simply disappeared. The debris granulated into pieces so small they were unrecognizable. The town's grain elevator, a massive reinforced concrete structure that had stood for decades as a landmark visible for miles across the flat Nebraska plains, was severely damaged, with large sections of the metal silos torn away and scattered across nearby fields. Home after home along Main Street was wiped off its foundation. Well-built, anchor-bolted houses that had weathered Nebraska storms for generations simply ceased to exist. At dozens of properties, only bare concrete slabs remained, swept completely clean of debris, damage so intense it earned high-end F4 ratings and sparked debate about whether portions of the damage might have actually been low-end F5. One particularly striking example of the tornado's power occurred at a farm on the eastern edge of town. A large steel farming implement, weighing several tons, was picked up, twisted into an unrecognizable ball of metal, and thrown over a quarter-mile before embedding itself into the ground. Nearby, a pickup truck was stripped down to its frame, with every body panel, the engine, and all interior components scattered separately across a half-mile area. Perhaps most dramatically, on the northern edge of the tornado's path, a Burlington Northern Santa Fe coal train was struck by the tornado's circulation. Over 20 coal cars, each weighing over 100 tons when loaded, were lifted off the tracks and scattered like toys. Some were thrown over 100 feet from the rail line. Others were stacked on top of each other in twisted piles of metal. The sheer force required to move objects of this mass defies easy comprehension. Throughout Hallam, trees were not just knocked down, they were debarked, debranched, and in many cases pulled completely out of the ground with their entire root systems, leaving gaping craters in the earth. Asphalt was scoured from roads. Grass was stripped from fields. The tornado even dug trenches in the ground in multiple locations, a phenomenon typically only seen in the most violent tornadoes. By 7:28 p.m., the tornado had exited the northeastern side of Hallam, leaving behind a scene that witnesses would describe as apocalyptic. Of the town's approximately 80 homes and businesses, 95% were damaged or destroyed. Nearly half were completely gone, leaving only bare foundations. The town's water tower, surprisingly, remained standing, a lonely sentinel overlooking a landscape of destruction. Miraculously, only one person lost their life in Hallam itself. A resident who had taken shelter in their home was killed when the structure collapsed around them. That the death toll was not far higher is attributed to several factors: the town's small population, the 15-minute warning time, and the fact that many residents had sturdy basements to shelter in. But dozens were injured, some critically, and hundreds were left homeless. After obliterating Hallam, the tornado continued its rampage to the northeast, maintaining its massive size and incredible strength. As it moved into more rural areas, the lack of structures made comprehensive damage surveys difficult, but the evidence of extreme winds was everywhere. Entire shelter belts, lines of trees planted to protect farmland from wind erosion, were completely obliterated along miles of the tornado's path. Where mature trees once stood, only flat, barren ground remained. Storm chasers following the tornado's path reported that the damage to vegetation was some of the most severe they had ever witnessed. At 7:45 p.m., the tornado struck the small community of Norris, located about 8 miles northeast of Hallam. While not as heavily populated as Hallam, Norris still had several dozen homes and a kindergarten through 12th grade school. The tornado's core passed directly over the Norris school, completely destroying it. Large sections of brick wall were thrown hundreds of yards. The school's buses, parked in a lot adjacent to the building, were picked up and hurled into nearby fields. Fortunately, the school was empty at the time. Several well-built homes in Norris were completely swept away at F4 intensity, with debris scattered for miles. One family's home was so thoroughly destroyed that investigators could only identify the location by the remaining foundation bolts. The family had sheltered in their basement and survived, emerging to find their entire world reduced to rubble around them. But even as the tornado maintained its violent intensity, something was beginning to change. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the massive wedge began to contract. The 2.5 miles wide circulation started to tighten, pulling inward. This did not make the tornado any less dangerous. In fact, as it shrank, some evidence suggests the core winds may have actually intensified. But the overall footprint of damage began to narrow. By 8:15 p.m., as the tornado crossed Highway 34 east of Norris, it had narrowed to approximately 1 mile wide, still an enormous tornado by any standard, but no longer the record-breaking giant it had been. Multiple subvortices continued to orbit within the parent circulation, creating erratic pockets of intense damage even as the tornado began its slow decay. At 8:34 p.m., after carving a continuous 52-mile path of destruction across south-central Nebraska, the Hallam tornado finally dissipated in open farmland southeast of Malcolm. From touchdown to dissipation, the tornado had been on the ground for over 2 hours, one of the longest-lived tornadoes in Nebraska history. In the days and weeks following the tornado, National Weather Service damage survey teams fanned out across the 52-mile path, documenting and rating the destruction. Their final assessment rated the Hallam tornado as F4 on the Fujita scale, with estimated peak winds of 207 to 260 miles per hour. This rating, however, sparked considerable debate within the meteorological community, a controversy that continues to this day. The debate centers on a fundamental challenge in tornado rating. The enhanced Fujita scale and its predecessor, the Fujita scale, rate tornadoes based on the damage they cause to human-built structures, not on measured wind speeds. F5 damage requires the complete destruction of well-built homes, with structures swept cleanly from their foundations and debris scattered long distances. Hallam clearly experienced this level of damage at multiple locations. Well-anchored homes were completely swept away. The high school was reduced to bare foundation in sections. Damage to the coal train demonstrated winds well in excess of 200 miles per hour. Ground scouring and vegetation damage suggested winds possibly exceeding 260 miles per hour in the core. So why was it not rated F5? The answer lies in the specifics of the damage indicators. While many homes were destroyed, damage survey teams noted that most of the complete destruction occurred to older homes or structures that were not built to modern building codes. The few newer, well-built homes in the tornado's path were severely damaged, but had some walls or structural elements remaining. For an F5 rating, even well-built modern homes must be completely swept away with nothing left, a threshold that the Hallam tornado, for all its size and power, did not definitively meet. Additionally, the tornado's massive width meant that most structures were hit by the outer circulation, where winds, while still extreme, were not quite at the 261 miles per hour threshold required for F5 winds. The tornado's most violent core appears to have passed primarily through open farmland, where there were no structures to destroy. This has led to ongoing discussions in online meteorology communities. and among storm chasers about whether Hallam should be considered an underrated tornado. Some argue that if the tornado's core had passed through a more densely built area, F5 damage would have been undeniable. Others counter that ratings must be based on observed damage, not theoretical damage that might have occurred. What is not in dispute is that the Hallam tornado was an extraordinarily violent, large, and powerful tornado that ranks among the strongest ever recorded in the United States, regardless of its official rating. Here is what makes the Hallam tornado truly remarkable. At 2.5 miles wide, it held the world record for the widest tornado ever documented from 2004 until 2013, when the El Reno, Oklahoma tornado reached 2.6 miles wide. For 9 years, Hallam was the widest tornado on Earth. It still stands as Nebraska's widest tornado in history. Yet today, outside Nebraska and meteorological circles, almost nobody remembers it. On online forums dedicated to severe weather, users frequently note that Hallam is a blind spot in public tornado knowledge, a forgotten tornado overshadowed by other, more deadly events. It did not kill dozens or hundreds like Joplin or Moore. It did not hit a major city. It was not caught in dramatic up-close footage that went viral. It struck a tiny farming town of 276 people in rural Nebraska on a Saturday evening, and while it destroyed that town, the relatively low death toll meant national media attention faded quickly. There is also a timing factor. The Hallam tornado occurred in 2004, right at the cusp of the social media age, but before platforms like YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook would make tornado footage instantly viral. While storm chasers captured impressive video, it did not spread the way footage from later tornadoes would. By the time tornado content became a major presence online, Hallam was already old news. The El Reno tornado in 2013, which surpassed Hallam's width record by just 1/10 of a mile, received massive media attention, partly because it killed storm chasers, Tim Samaras, Paul Samaras, and Carl Jung, and because it became a story about the dangers of storm chasing itself. El Reno became known as the widest tornado ever recorded, and Hallam faded from public memory despite having held that record for nearly a decade. The Hallam tornado did, however, teach meteorologists and emergency managers crucial lessons that would improve tornado safety in the years to come. First, it demonstrated that tornado width alone does not determine lethality. The Hallam tornado was massive, but its relatively slow forward speed of 35 miles per hour and the 15-minute warning time allowed most residents to reach shelter. Contrast this with the Joplin tornado in 2011. That tornado was narrower, but it moved faster and people had less warning time. It killed 161 people. Second, Hallam reinforced the importance of basements and underground shelters in tornado-prone areas. Nearly every survivor in Hallam who escaped serious injury had sheltered underground. Those who attempted to ride out the storm above ground faced life-threatening danger, and the one fatality in town occurred in an above-ground structure. Underground safety saved lives. Third, the tornado provided valuable data for understanding supercell structure and evolution. The way the entire mesocyclone descended to the ground, creating the 2.5-mile-wide tornado, gave researchers insight into the mechanics of extreme tornado formation. Radar data from the event has been used in numerous meteorological studies in the years since. Finally, Hallam highlighted the importance of not just warning for tornadoes, but providing specific information about tornado size and intensity. Modern tornado warnings now often include phrases like particularly dangerous situation or tornado emergency for the most extreme threats, language that evolved partly from events like Hallam, where a standard tornado warning did not fully convey the magnitude of what was approaching. Emergency-level language can change how people respond. In the aftermath of the May 22nd tornado, Hallam faced an existential question. Could a town of 276 people, 95% destroyed, rebuild? The answer, remarkably, was yes, though the town that emerged would be forever changed. Volunteers from across Nebraska and neighboring states poured into Hallam in the days following the tornado, helping to clear debris and salvage what little could be saved. Federal disaster assistance helped residents rebuild homes and businesses. The high school, too damaged to repair, was demolished, and students were merged with a neighboring district. Today, Hallam still exists, though it is noticeably smaller than before the tornado. Some residents chose not to rebuild, taking the insurance money and moving elsewhere. The population has declined, but the town's spirit endures. Every May 22nd, those who remain remember the night the sky fell. A small memorial park now stands in Hallam, commemorating the tornado and the one life lost. It is a quiet place, often empty, on the flat Nebraska plains. But it marks the spot where, for 8 terrifying minutes in 2004, the widest tornado in the world erased a town from the map. While El Reno eventually surpassed Hallam's width by the narrowest of margins, Hallam still holds several impressive distinctions. Longest duration tornado of exceptional width, maintaining a 2+ mile width for over 20 minutes. Widest tornado in Nebraska history. One of only a handful of tornadoes worldwide to exceed 2 miles in width. Longest tracked violent tornado in Nebraska history at 52 miles. Perhaps more importantly, Hallam stands as a reminder that tornado records are not just about death tolls or dramatic footage. Sometimes the most remarkable tornadoes are the ones that combine multiple extreme factors, size, intensity, duration, into a singular event that pushes the boundaries of what we think is meteorologically possible. The Hallam tornado proved that under the right conditions, a tornado can grow so large that it becomes less like a traditional twister and more like a massive rotating storm system touching the ground, a wall of wind stretching from horizon to horizon. And yet, for all its size and power, it remains a footnote in tornado history, the monster that nobody talks about. On May 22, 2004, the residents of Hallam, Nebraska learned that sometimes the biggest threats are the ones the world forgets.